Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this event dedicated to the International Day of Women in Science. My name is Andrea Cavalli. Since January, I'm the new director of SICAM, and it's a great pleasure to have you here and to have this excellent workshop dedicated to women in science. As you may know, SICAM has always paid attention to gender diversity, but also to other kind of diversities, and this will be also part of my directorship, and possibly even more than what was done in the past. I'm very glad to be here again, delighted to see excellent scientists around the table, and very warm welcome by SICAM. And without any further delay, I leave the stage to Sara Bonella. I would like to thank Sara for putting in place such a top quality event, and again, welcome, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. A very warm welcome also from me. As you may hear from my voice, I am sort of exiting a flu, so we'll see how this goes. But I have lots of friends here sitting around the table with me that will help in case of sudden collapse of the voice, things like that. So end of the lamentations. Super happy to be here, to have the opportunity for the second year to create an opportunity for a conversation and an exchange. As Andrea said, diversity is incredibly important in science, and not just in science. Gender diversity, what we're focusing on today, is one of the items on the table. And so we start today by taking the opportunity of the International United Nations Day for Women and Girls in Science to keep alive a conversation that we hope will not stop today, and will not be limited to the very kind and exciting ladies that I am sharing these screens with today. So you members of the audience, please, this is meant to be interactive, so there will be a lot of time for in discussion with you, for you to share your experiences or impressions or comments with us at the end of our first panel. And your way to communicate with us is going to be the Q&A tool in Zoom. This is your only access to us, I'm sorry to say for the moment. Just signal that you want to ask a question, and then we will monitor the Q&A, and you will be invited in the order in which you have sort of registered to ask a question to unmute. So that's something that you will be enabled to do at the moment in which you can ask questions, so you can also have a chance to exchange directly with our panelists. Now, as per SICAM standard style, this is meant to be a very informal, very off the books, but hopefully on the record way of discussing what we feel is a really, really important topic. So this is not an afternoon about statistics. This is an afternoon about people. This is not an afternoon about big scenarios and big problems, although of course we will be immersed in those, but this is an afternoon for stories, for examples, and to tackle a very, very broad issue, starting from very, very specific examples. I have the pleasure to do that in the company of some excellent companions, and I would, without further ado, start by just inviting them to very quickly introduce themselves, highlighting sort of the key points, what they would like to share with us about their experience up until now. I will just go round the table in the order that I see things appearing on my screen, so this is completely arbitrary. Carmen, why don't you start? And you need to unmute yourself in order to talk.
That's right. Thank you, Sara. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. So I'm Carmen Rovira. I am research professor at the University of Barcelona. I am chemist and I work in enzyme catalysis. I did my PhD here in the University of Barcelona. I graduated in 1995. My PhD was about applications of quantum chemistry to small molecules, and then I also did a part of my PhD was in electronic structure of solids, and this part I did in the US, where I was for 1 year. Then after PhD, I went for postdoc. I went to Germany. I went to the Max Planck Institute in Stuttgart. I joined the group of Michele Parinello there. And there I changed subject and I started working on applications of ab initio molecular dynamics to systems of biological interest. So that was new for me because I hardly knew what was a protein before going there. But and of course, I didn't know what was the Parinello method. But I heard that that was the future, that was important. So I decided to go there. And maybe for some young people here, maybe surprised about this, but at that time, well, I'm not maybe so old, but at that time, people go for postdoc without knowing the person you are going to join. No? So you just know the name and you wrote maybe a letter or a mail, but you don't know the person. But that was a very great experience for me. Then after the postdoc, I decided to go back to Spain. That was after almost 3 years, and try to get a permanent position in the university. That was a bit of typical trajectory. When I was back in Spain, then a new program started from the government that was called Ramon y Cajal. That was 5-year positions, 5-year positions that were temporary, but kind of good positions at that time. And that gave me the opportunity to move to a new institute, a new research science park that was newly constructed there, and start my own group there. And this is what I did. It was not the safest decision because to stay in the university was probably safer, but that was very challenging for me. So I went there, and eventually it paid off because a new program from the government came out. It was called like CREA for research, permanent research positions, and I eventually could get one of them after some times of applying, of course. And this is where I end up. So this is where I am now. Well, later I moved this position to the university again, and I am there in the Department of Chemistry working in enzyme catalysis. So my trajectory was with like Barcelona, States, Germany, back to Barcelona, a closed loop.
But we start seeing the theme of traveling around in order to follow one's career. Thank you, Carmen. Chiara, you're up next.
So thank you for inviting me, Sarah, and giving me the possibility to speak to some friends, I hope girls, women, but not only, also boys and men. And I started my career taking a PhD in Scuola Normale, Pisa, under the supervision of Edoardo Vesentini. I must confess, I'm a pure mathematician, so please forgive me. I'm just a geometer. I'm working in complex analysis, and in the last years, my interest turned to quaternionic geometry, quaternionic analysis. So I have a fault, I know. There's a stain on my conscience. So the idea is, after taking my PhD, I moved to SISSA, Scuola Internazionale di Studi Superiori Avanzati in Trieste. I was a permanent researcher there. Then I moved to the University of Bologna, also as a young researcher, but a permanent position at that time. And then I moved to Università Politecnica delle Marche as an associate professor in geometry, and now as a full professor since a lot of years. And I'm interested in, as I told you, in complex analysis, in quaternionic analysis, but I also work for Unione Matematica Italiana, which is the learned society of Italian mathematicians, as a coordinator of the Committee for Equal Opportunities. So I'm interested in giving a boost to the position of women in science, and in particular in mathematics. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Well, I mean, you are an example of us practicing diversity. The fact that you're not, in fact, a testament to what we want to do. Paola, you're up next.
Thank you, Sarah. So again, thank you also for being invited at this table. It's very nice to be here and surrounded by this very interesting group of people as well. So my name is Paola Carbone. I'm Italian, but I am working in the UK, in the United Kingdom, and the University of Manchester, where I'm professor of physical chemistry in the Department of Chemical Engineering. My area of expertise is simulation of soft matter, and I probably work more on the computational physics aspect of it, but my background is a chemist, so I graduated in Genova, which is my city, in chemistry. Then I moved to Milan, where I did a PhD, and mainly I work in the CNR in Milan, in an institute which has been going through a lot of mergers, I think, so it doesn't exist anymore as an institute on its own. Then I moved to Bologna in the group of Fabrizia Negri in Chamicham, so in the chemistry department again, where I met also my husband. So that was a big move, important move for my life. And I stayed there for around 1.5 years, and then I moved to Germany, where I got a Humboldt fellowship. I really wanted to go to Germany because the group that host me was in Darmstadt, Professor Müller-Platte's group, was working at that time in an area that was very much growing. It was the coarse graining of soft matter. So I really wanted to join the group, and I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship. And after around 2.5 years, my husband was in the UK already as a lecturer. So I applied for a fellowship, and I got a fellowship, and I moved to Manchester, in the Department of Chemical Engineering, where basically the classical modeling is done. And then since then, I've been here since then. So all my academic career has been happening here. And maybe something to mention, since 2020, I am the elected chair of the CCP5, which is the UK consortium representing the classical molecular modeling of condensed matter. And I'm happy to say I'm the first female after 40 years of the consortium, so I think it's a good sign specifically for this meeting.
Hi, Shalom, you too. Thank you very much, Paola. Shoshana, you're next. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be with you, and it's a great pleasure to be in such a good company. And yes, my story is a very long one because I'm a real dinosaur, as I told you before. So, you know, I have, I'm Israeli originally. My name is Shoshana Wodak, and I studied in Israel until half of my studies. But then I moved to Geneva, and from Geneva, I moved to Belgium. And in Belgium, I studied chemistry, and I studied chemistry. I graduated on studying theoretical chemistry, and I did that at my master's degree with Robert Brout, who actually was a physicist, a very famous physicist that was linked to the boson discovery. But you know, I really wanted to do biophysics because I was fascinated by medicine, and I wanted to fascinate by medicine on one hand and by physics on the other. And I wanted to bridge the two. And Robert Brout promised me that we will do something that will do that. So we worked on many body problem of van der Waals interactions. After that, you know, I really wanted to move to the US, and I did my PhD at Columbia University, was one of the pioneers of molecular graphics and protein folding, which was Cyrus Leventhal. And with him, you know, we started to really, you know, fold proteins and the graphics. There was no graphics at the time. The only graphics that were available were, you know, black and white graphics, and there were vector generators, very hard to work with. There were actually two systems in the US, one that he developed and another one that was developed by Bob Langridge, you know, in Princeton and then at UCSF. But very quickly, we started to work on protein-protein interactions because we wanted to find out what happens, how the sickle cell fiber forms. And this is where the whole, multi-state modeling started, using protein modeling systems and molecular graphics. And after, I stayed over for a year of postdoctoral, studies with Cyrus Leventhal. And then I moved back to Europe on an EMBO fellowship, and actually started my own group nearly immediately. But at some point, I didn't have money anymore, had no job, and I was made in contact. Actually, I went back to Europe, and I started a collaboration at the Pasteur Institute with someone extremely smart and who became my longtime collaborator, Joël Janin. And through him, I got in touch with CICAM and with the director of CICAM at the time, who was really very, very nice to me, and was Carl Moser. And I got involved deeply with CICAM. We had several workshops on protein folding, protein interactions, also on force fields, several workshops on force field, but especially one really, foundation workshop at 1976, where the molecular dynamics started. So this, kind of set the basis of my career and my interest. Protein interactions remain, my big interest. And, I work on the simulation side of that, on the bioinformatics side of that, on the proteomics side of protein interactions. And I came back to Brussels, founded my own laboratory, and actually involved a number of women in my group. And that was not easy. So I have lots of stories to tell you about this. This was a struggle and has always been a struggle. Even working in Paris, I was always commuting between two labs. And at some point, later on in my career, I was involved at the founding of the EBI, the European Bioinformatics Institute. I had a group there and a group in Brussels. And after that, I decided I became closer to the age of retirement, and I decided I didn't want to retire. So I left Brussels and I went to start a new lab at the age of 62 in Toronto. And I stayed there for 8 years and came back. And now I'm semi-retired, but still working, with Elixir. And I'm also heavily involved in community activities. I have been coordinated CAPRI, which is the critical assessment of predicted interactions, since its inception in 2002. And this is a fantastic community. We work together, and until now we published together a number of papers. And community activities, I love it now. So it's the substitute for my lab. Or here is the story, part of the story.
A very good beginning of a story. Thank you very much, Shoshana. I hope that dinosaurs never go extinct. Elisa, up to you now.
Yeah, I agree with, I subscribe to that. Don't leave us the dinosaurs. So let me just start from the beginning. I graduated in Modena, and after a long way, I'm now back in Modena, where I'm professor of condensed matter physics at the university, and also part of the Institute of Nanoscience of the National Research Council. My main focus has been along the years in different flavors, looking at the properties of materials from so-called first principles approaches. So starting from fundamental quantum mechanics and looking at the electronic properties and the interactions, which become very relevant when you talk about nanostructures and nanosystems, also nanobiosystems. So there you can, working with a single electrons is not enough. You need to be careful about the interactions, because the electrons are close to each other and the properties depend very much, and especially the spectroscopy, the way you see the matter depend very much on the interaction. So this is one of the topics where I've been looking at, both in terms of applications and also in terms of some method development. So I started out my thesis more or less at the beginning of this type of activities worldwide, and started with some surface physics. But then went to Stuttgart, also to the Max Planck, but I think it was a previous generation with respect to Carmen. And I was then in Stuttgart and in Grenoble, looking at interpretation of the first heterostructure nanosystems that people were studying also from the experimental side. I started to like very much working closely with experiments. So looking at excitations, vibrations, and so on of material. By the way, in Stuttgart, I learned much more Spanish than German, because the community there was very diverse in terms of international composition, and so this stayed for a long time in terms of friendships and collaborations, also much broader than the ones in Germany, but also a lot in Germany as well. Now, after that, I came back to Italy and working at CNR in Rome, and I got my associate professorship back in Modena in 1992, and then I stayed there since, became a full professor. Meanwhile, I have, I think one thing that I've liked, sometimes it's useful to tell these self descriptions, because you realize that along the time, I've very much liked to set up things. So I basically was the founding director of one center, which is now a part of a Nanoscience Institute of CNR, and is about 40 people working there, which has a large component on computational sciences, but also experiments, computational material science especially. And that was one step. And now, more recently, I've set up with a large collaboration throughout Europe, one of the European Centers of Excellence for HPC applications, which is called MAX, Materials Design at the Exascale. There's a lot of community effort in developing codes and other things. But also there, I'm again helping to coordinate some research work. So basically, this happens very much when I came to Modena, for example. There are many things in the organization I didn't like. So I found that the best ways was trying to set up a broader kind of context where I could find myself better. And somehow this is one of the things where I see I can help the community also in practical terms. First thing that I did when I came there is double the size of the women bathroom with respect, which was earlier much, much smaller than the men bathroom, and put a big mirror in the bathroom. But not, I mean, hopefully also something else, but that's just for a laugh. Meanwhile, I had a lot of other management things that were probably too many, like coordinating the INFM Instituto Nazionale per la Fisica della Materia, which is a big national institution with many centers inside, and also working with the IUPAP, International Union for Pure and Applied Physics, where I was Associate Secretary General for some time. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because there I helped to set up a working group on women in physics that started a series of conferences that take place since then, and gather. It's really international, so it's people from all continents and many countries, and a lot of experiences also in sharing and learning from regional differences came up there. And I try to continue to do that in other ways also in Italy, but I think for the moment that's more than enough.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you all for this introduction. We decided to give it a bit of time because it's important for the audience as well to understand the different paths that the people that we have invited have sort of followed to get where they are. As you can see, we've tried to have representatives from different generations. We are mostly, I have to say, European-based or people with experience in the US. This will somehow limit and bias our perspective with respect to what Elisa was saying before. But, you know, better start somewhere and better start talking about things you know best, as opposed to trying to overreach. The next question is still a bit general, but I think it's important because there is this common theme that goes around that girls are not particularly, you know, interested or attracted to science. And I just wanted to ask you, you know, what attracted you to this particular field? And did you feel weird because you were interested in science? Maybe Paola, you can start now.
Yes. So I think actually in Italy it's not that uncommon that girls are interested in scientific subjects, at least not when I was in high school. To decide to go for science, actually, I wasn't one of these people that have, you know, the dream since they were a child to become a scientist. I really liked science and maths and science, chemistry as well, but also history. I remember I was a bit undecided if I wanted to do kind of economic and history at university or a scientific subject. And then I decided to go for science because I thought I liked more objective analysis and studies. History was a bit subjective, perhaps, in terms of interpretation. So I didn't feel weird. And there were a lot of very clever girls in my high school class. So I wasn't definitely the only one. But I didn't start with this kind of dream to be a scientist since I was a child. But I think in all cases, I was driven by curiosity. I always liked learning and studying. That's something I really liked. And I was lucky enough that there was no trouble or, you know, you were not stereotyped at all. My feeling is that maybe people are more stereotyped now, perhaps girls, well, at least in the UK, than at that time, which wasn't stereotyping.
I think that's a very, very interesting point. So just to share a common memory, I was also very indecised in between history and physics, and Elisa too, I see. The reason why I chose this was, well, not only that, but I remember having a conversation with my father, who was an historian by training, like a couple of weeks before I had to enroll to university. And he said, well, Sarah, I think you can read a professional book on history, even if you don't have a degree on history, but with physics, so go for it, which was a lot of fun. But then he was convinced that all I could do was change light bulbs in the house, but that's a different story. But that was a joke. Elisa, would you like to take over here?
Oh, yeah. I also was coming to physics from more of a set of cultural questions than thinking about applications, technologies, and things like this, which is sometimes in many countries one of the main drivers. So, for example, in Germany, I realized that when you enter in physics, you're thinking very much of working in industry or really very close to applications. In Italy, there's still more fundamental emphasis on fundamental science. Of course, this is examples, and it's never too general. And on my side, I also like very much philosophy, history, but especially philosophy. And I thought that physics was very close to that. And I also like the challenge. And I also felt that having a field which is more on sound grounds, when you can prove yourself and have some very solid, safe benchmarks is important. After all, we all know that this life is much more liquid than we think when we start. But in a way, that was one of the points that attracted me. And so I started thinking of very basic fundamentals of quantum physics. And then when I reached there, I actually got very much engaged also with applications of, so seeing quantum physics at work in some real life experiments or applications. I found that very exciting. but I never would have guessed that when I started. The other point is that I never really thought at that time that being a woman in physics would be particularly difficult. I had an interest in women issues. And that was a time of very active feminist discussions and so on. So I had a cultural, I was sensitive to that from the cultural point of view, but I never thought that I would find myself in an environment where being a woman was more difficult. And this lasted until I was relatively, I mean, in the early years, I was sure that if I did things well, I would be recognized. I mean, everything would work. So my target was being good at doing what I was supposed to do or what I thought I should do. It's only later that, I mean, those were times, because I'm also close to a dinosaur. There is at that time, I mean, I remember conferences where I was the only woman, meetings where I was the only woman, and even in Stuttgart when we came there, it was a couple of us, not more than that. So fortunately, some nice people around that helped, but that it's only later that I realized that maybe when I got in, I wouldn't see. I would see some problems related to being a woman in that environment. I think.
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. I think we will go a bit deeper into that with the next round of questions. Chiara, maybe you could also share something with us.
Well, I started being interested in science when I was at primary school. Maybe around 10, there was a toy which was called Piccolo Chimico. It was a box with test tubes and a very small microscope and some chemistries that you could prepare crystals and things like that, do small experiments in chemistry. So, well, I wanted to be a scientist. I was maybe a chemist or a physicist. Well, physicist. What was physics? 10 years, when you're 10 years old, you don't know what physics is. And so I started moving towards mathematics. And my idea is that for me, I was fascinated by the beauty of mathematics. So at mid-high school, maybe at 16, something like that, I was tempted by computer science. It was the years of Big 20 or things like that. It was the explosion of computer science. So I was tempted, but then when I applied to the university, when I enrolled, I decided to go for math. And for me, it was important also a course I took when I was 17 in Scuola Normale. Scuola Normale offered a week of clever, maybe, well, they said clever students. They enrolled from several high schools to give an idea of what a university was. And there I was fascinated by some person who would be later my colleagues. In particular, I was really fascinated by Edoardo Vesentini, you know, Sarah, well, great. And other youngest people, well, they were all men, but I didn't notice that. Also, when I arrived in Scuola Normale, I was the mathematician, the women in mathematics, the one. Well, because there was a joke, there's a uniqueness result for women in science in Scuola Normale, but there's no an existence result. So for many years, the number is 0. In some years, the number becomes 1. So they moved to 2 maybe in the last years. But I didn't realize that it was something strange that in some 25 people, I was the only woman. But I didn't notice. It took me, well, I'm not very clever, so, you know, it took me several years. I got my PhD. I was the unique woman who took a PhD in my year, but well, it's okay. So maybe around 30, I started looking around and saying, well, but there are not so many women in our career. So in mathematics, well, there's something missing. There are people missing. There are women missing. Why? So I started noticing that some 25 years ago. So strange, but it took me a lot of time to notice it.
But it's true. I can relate to that. Starting to pay attention to that, to say, well, I'm the only one in the BOD of CCAM directors. I've been now things are changing, fortunately, and it felt normal, and it's not, right? You have to sort of also put that in the back of your brain. Carmen, would you like to?
Yes. In my case, so similar to Paola, when I was a child, I don't remember having a special curiosity or any dream to be a scientist. I've had the normal curiosity. I think all the children have a lot of curiosity. So I don't have a clear idea how I went into science. I guess it was a combination of little things. In my family, well, I was good at the school. That's the only thing I can say. But in my family, nobody had gone to university, so I could not get any role model in that sense. I didn't get any as a present anything to play chemistry or physics or many books. So I was not in that intellectual environment. But one good thing is that my parents they didn't put me limitation on the other hand, no? So they didn't tell me what to do or what not to do. So since I was good at the school, I guess I continued this pathway. And these other people that I could see in my environment. Some of my friends, I remember that the parents were expecting that when they finish primary school, they go to find a job. They want to make money. Or at most go to learn, in the case of the girls, to be hairdresser or secretary, teacher of kids, things like this. But I think in my case, I was not encouraged in that direction. Then when I was finishing primary school, I remember that there was a new teacher that came in. We had only one teacher for everybody because I was in a small village. She was a very young teacher. And she mentioned me that the existence of people that devote their lives to study a specific subject, something that is important, like trying to solve a complex equation that nobody has ever solved. And she didn't mention the word scientist, I think, but I guess that's how the first time that I heard about something like this. And at that time, maybe she didn't explain properly because I had the impression that was very strange. That was for strange people, not normal. But on the other hand, I thought, since that was about knowledge and about going deeply into some subject, I was also a bit attracted to this. And then I was a bit terrified because I didn't tell anybody because I also thought that that's for strange people. So that was all. Then eventually, I went to high school. Then later I went to university to study chemistry in Barcelona. And when I was in the university, then I knew what it was a scientist, and I realized a scientist is a normal person. It's not nothing strange, and it's just another job, one more that requires motivation and effort and hard work. But science is not the only one. And then I wanted to be a scientist at that point, and then since the problem of the strange people has been solved, then I tried to do better in the university in order to get a PhD fellowship when I finished, because at that time it was the only way to do PhD, to obtain a PhD fellowship. Trying to have good marks to get a PhD fellowship. Now I think there's more opportunities, but at that time the only way was this one. So that's how I went into science.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Shoshana.
Okay, so in my case, science was something that I was, faced with reasonably early because my father was a clinician, but also a good scientist. And I spent a lot of time with him, and he kind of, every time at supper time, he would talk to me about chemistry and about medicine. And I really loved medicine, and I thought I would become a medical researcher, when I get older. But as a child already, I was very curious. I took apart his alarm clocks and never put it back together because I wanted to know how it worked from the inside. I took apart radios as well, and sometimes I found a little mouse in them. In Israel, that was happening every so often. So I was interested. I don't know why, but I was really interested in understanding things. And I was a lonely child, so I read a lot, and I thought maybe this. I just wanted to learn, and but I also love music and dancing, and my mother wanted me to be a dancer and a musician, and but I felt when I was playing piano, I felt somehow I was in a dream, and when I finished playing, I came back to reality, and somehow the side of my brain was not working right. So I thought maybe this is not exactly what I needed to do. And I wasn't particularly talented, but my mother thought that I was. So yes, so as I continued in school, I also had a very bad memory for history. I never knew, who was, before whom. And I always studied this the day before the exam, and I managed the exam extremely well. But 3 or 4 days afterwards, I forgot everything. And for some reason, that didn't happen, for problems in math or problems in physics or numbers. And that was so satisfying once you solved the problem. It was so satisfying, but it was sometimes hard work. Geometry demonstrations, I spent hours on that. But when I found it, it was really satisfying. So that was, an intellectual activity that I really liked. So somehow, without even knowing, where I was going, what I was going to do, I just, kind of followed my own intuition into science. And, at school, at high school, I ended up in a very, very good high school where science was very, very well taught. That was in Israel. And somehow I was very advanced in science, relative to other schools. So when I moved to Switzerland to finish my high school, I was among the best, trained students in math and physics. And I had to learn French at the same time. I didn't know any word of French. I went to Mathématiques élémentaires at the French high school system. And of course, I couldn't remember, history or geography very well. So I excelled in science, and I got my degree like this. And then, it was very simple. I knew that I was going to do, to work in science, and I did my work at the University of Brussels, as I said before, on physical chemistry. And there were women around, it was a chemistry program, there were women around. And then, I wanted to go again, further and continue to actually always wanted to bridge physics and biology, physics and medicine. And this is how, more and more I was interested in making for myself a new program of biophysics. It didn't exist at the time. So I picked, when I went to Columbia, I picked courses in physics and in biology. And I was also fascinated by experimental biology, but, somehow the theoretical side always pushed me to the theory, but I always interacting with experimental people. But I really, like to interact with, there were lots of women in the department, but not in the more theoretical aspects, mostly in the applied and the experimental side. So, yeah, what I felt as a woman, in science later on, I was also one of the only women in many, many conferences, in Europe and in the US. And sometimes, what we did actually at the time doing protein modeling was very new. So I was a woman and I was doing something extremely new that was not accepted as serious science, because, you only predict something in computations. What is the worth of it if you don't have an experimental validation? And that was the struggle, not me being a woman, a struggle of what I was doing. And, yeah, I mean, the woman issue was not so much at the time, not so evident at the time. But as a woman, I knew always that I wanted to make sure that I don't make mistakes. I was unsure of myself, not very confident. So I studied twice as much as I think my men colleagues did. I tried to prepare my talks to make sure everything is, top. And that was sometimes very stressful. But other than that, I think women, I didn't feel that I was disadvantaged at all. Sometimes it was an advantage, but, I never really took advantage of that.
Well, thank you all. I mean, just if I can try to distill a few things, I've heard words like curiosity, the will to go deep into things, the notion that having solid foundations based on formalism and results is reassuring. And I don't think that these are male or female drivers. They are human drivers, right? And so it's just that sometimes people decline them in different ways. I mean, this insistence on community and on paying attention of building things and so on and so forth. But yeah, maybe this is a message that one needs to get across as much as we can, as well as this being normal, not being normal. What is being normal, which is another big question, right? That is sort of also part of the conversations with the community at large, not just with our colleagues and friends and people who may be listening to us right now. Shoshana, thank you very much for your last observation about feeling that sometimes you had to put in twice as much work, because this transitions, I think, very, very nicely into the next topic that I wanted to bring up. And for this one, let's not just go around the table. Any one of you who wants to say something, and if you want to interact, share things, please feel free to do that. Because, okay, are there specific challenges to being a female scientist?
Well, maybe I can say something which, is not exactly that, but, I was quite pretty when I was young, right? And I mean, that was, I didn't realize that, but I was.
Exactly.
And I felt that was a disadvantage because when I was going to exams, my colleagues were saying, oh yeah, you had a very, very good mark, and that's because you are, you're so pretty. This is what made you. So I was so upset. So I went to exams with my raincoat buttoned until here. And I said, I'm not going to open it, and nothing could be told against me. So this was something I was really mad about this, because every time things went well, it was yes, of course, of course, this is because you're nice, you're pretty. Yeah. So this was one observation I would like to make.
Absolutely. Carmen, you wanted to say something?
No, just that I didn't understand the first sentence of Shoshana, so but I think finally I understood from the context. Yeah.
It's interesting because this has pushed for a while to adopt male attitudes in situations. I feel that it's very important never to forget that there is a specificity and a difference in the way in which people deal with things, even between men. I'm not sure that all men, are equal in the way in which they approach things or problems. But it's important never to lose one's identity because of pressure. I think this is super important. Elisa.
One thing I wanted to say is that this is, I share very much your view. Some of the things that we are saying is also typical of others, men, and they can come from different origins. Even the aspect of feeling insecure and willing to not sufficiently self-confident and having to be over safe by being over prepared and so on. I think many of us share this, and also some kind of imposter syndrome where you always think that they are just by mistake. And so I think it's good for the younger women, for example, to know that if this happens, it's normal. But I also think that there are many and sometimes they are also the nicer male colleagues that have the same impression, and that that feel pressure and being inadequate and so on. So I think if we insist on the fact that you have to take into account this aspect, it's going to be good for everyone, for the community, including men. So this over show off, this that we often see, this kind of sometimes aggressive attitude and so on, that we don't like, and that makes us feel unsafe, and or at least doesn't reassure us. This is something which is bad for us, and it's bad for men, and often for the best people who are not feeling like contributing as much as they could. Now, other aspects. So one comment on this. Feeling this issue of having to do double and as much and being safe, does this limit our creativity with respect to some of those who take more risk and don't worry and take other paths? I think it may happen. So I'm trying to work to avoid that, because sometimes by doing so, I see it also in some of the girl students that I meet. I see that they are brilliant, but they are too worried about being safe and don't take the risk of being brilliant. So I would suggest take it easy, because that helps. There is one. Well, okay. Let me go for the others, and then I have one more comment about it.
Paula, you had raised your hand first.
Yes. So I think the question was if you ever felt different, or that the choice of staying science was harder. I think that as some other comments were made, initially when I was very young, I didn't notice any difference. I didn't feel different, especially when I was at university. Well, maybe some comments here and there, but not major. I think started to change when I became more established. And well, there's various aspects. You never know what's true or not, But some things that I found harder, as I have 2 children. And the first child I had, after just 1 year, I moved to the UK. And that's, of course, it's a challenge. I mean, we can't hide that, because you stay at home for almost a year. And for me, I just started at the university here in Manchester, so I didn't have a network and everything, so it was hard. And it was hard because I think 13 years ago, was still this culture that you have to work and networking after work and going to the pub here, specifically in the UK. And this, of course, limited me because I have to go home. But I have to say, a positive aspect of it is that I see a massive change in the recent years. And the reason is because the the partners take a more and more hands-on approach to the family. They look after children as well. Yesterday, I had a chat, a Zoom with the company, right? A big software company. And the male guy I was having this chat, was quite formal, had a little children, especially one boy that was clearly unwell at home. So I think that attitude is really changing in the way we manage the family and care for children in the family. And this is really positive. And it's not only positive for female, I was mentioning before, it was positive for men as well, which I'm sure they want to be much more involved with the life of their children. And I think in the past was very different because, the traveling, for example, is another point. And I see a change in attitude. So I'm positive and optimistic for the future, maybe too much. But.
No, it's always good to be, it's better to be an optimist and be proven wrong than a pessimist and be proven right. No, I think that was the joke. Carmen, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, in that direction, it's very similar experience as Paola. I never felt any discriminated for being a woman in the past, or until I was more senior. And so many of the positions I had, fellowship, whatever, for some of them I was the only woman, but I didn't even notice, and I didn't feel any discrimination. sometime somebody told me, oh, you are the only woman in experimental science and mathematics in ICREA when I got to business. Oh, really? Okay, it doesn't matter, doesn't make any difference. But then the problem is later, no? When you have children, it's a bit of a difference. And I have similar experience as Paula. I see that things are completely changing now, because that's you enter in a potential where when you have children, that is eventually you go out, but it's we're in a minimum at that moment. I remember after 8 months of having going back to conference and so on, I couldn't catch up with people when they were talking about the new developments, and I had this sensation, oh, I am out of this work. I will never be good again. I will be a normal scientist, a standard, a mediocre scientist. Okay, maybe I'll get a position, but I will never do anything important or anything. And then, so at that level, it was. And then eventually things went better, no? But it's the only time in my career, I think, that I saw something was not correct. Yeah. And then concerning the risks, that I also agree with Elisa when she mentioned about taking risk. Yeah, I think that's a challenge nowadays, because young women do not take yet enough risk as males. No, I see that also that in conversation with my students, that normally a woman that wants to do science is not enough that you say you are good, you can do science if you want. No, she needs to see that is good enough, but it's never good enough, because you don't need to be Einstein to do this. And I think male, they just do this easily than women for the moment, but I think this will change for sure.
There was something interesting that maybe it's worth sharing with everybody, that we sort of shared among us at some point, which is that, the role models that we are sometimes offered, in TV shows or whatever, is Marie Curie, right? I mean, you have to be a heroine, Marie Curie genius type to justify the fact that you are a female in science. Or Paula, I think you were talking about a TV series. Sorry.
There's always some problem with the women that care about their job. Used to have all the kind of disasters in their life, and it was always related to the fact that they took job seriously and they wanted to make a career, etc. But things have changed again, because I think society, at least here in the United Kingdom, they don't take it this anymore. It's not true. You can have a satisfying research or career in any kind of sectors, and having a satisfied life as well. So there's no need to choose anymore.
And your children are not going to turn into serial killers because you've chosen.
Who knows? At the moment, they look fine, but yeah, that's absolutely true. They look fine.
And then we go back to Elisa, maybe Shoshana.
I have 2 points. One, I think we should remember that things are changing. I see they are indeed changing, but one, women make still, it's very tiring. I see those who have children very tired all the time. So it's true that it's changing, but not, and very glad to notice that it's changing. I think not enough, and this is true of the society in general, and not only in our jobs, and has to do with everyday life and careers. And so, and second, also in other, I think the world is large, and I don't think this progress is so it's true everywhere. As we know, there's many places which are a disaster, and I think I hope we keep this in our minds, even though we celebrate our kind of partial successes and advancements. There's 2 points that I wanted to raise. One, two minor aspects. One is the main thing that annoyed me was when I was the one of the few in the meetings and so on, was not so much that I couldn't discuss and contribute, but especially in policy meetings, people just see you as transparent. So you say something, and in the end, it's picked up by somebody else, but it's the somebody else who will be cited and recognized. And it happened to many of us that I talked to, that you feel you do things, but this is not so visible. And so in a way, I'm just saying that because we are not learning much how to make things visible. We don't care very much. I myself, as I'm a disaster on my website, I'm a disaster on, so we can work on making ourselves more visible. And also because now we are more than one, typically we are working to make the others more visible. And I think that helps a lot. One thing. Second thing, I want to mention an aspect which I think is very positive in how we are different, and I found myself and some others different. Of course, in the way we do science, not just in the social aspects of it, sociological aspects of it. And this is, okay, of course, as everyone would say, the equations are the same whether it's a woman or a man working at them. And of course, an experiment, if it's done the right way, shouldn't be gender dependent. But on the other hand, not at the level of the science that you do, but more at the meta level of what you decide to choose, the paths that you choose in science, and also the lateral paths. And this can be different in the way you take responsibilities, and this may affect the way not only yourself, but the team works and chooses topics and takes responsibility. So it's not true of all women, but I see many women where there is a different attention to some of these aspects. Also some men, unfortunately. And I think we should, it's interesting to try and see what are the positive aspects of being, of the way we act that may influence the way the science is done. And I think hopefully for the best, better than if we wouldn't be there. So it's another way of saying that diversity can help. But in our case, I think it's not, of course, in the content, but by choosing the path, it also affects the contents of what we do, I think.
Thank you, Elisa, very much. Chiara, you had your hand up.
Well, I wanted just to add a few points. Well, I'm not so sure that in Italy things are changing so quickly. To be more precise, I'm almost sure that things are changing very slowly. Because, well, caring duties in Italy just rely on the shoulders of women. And not only for children, for young women, but there's also a part of us who is going to an early retirement to become a grandma. So the idea is that there's a short, not so short number of us who is going to retire to take care of their grandchildren. So the idea is that, well, the leaking pipe doesn't leak only at the early stages of career, but also when there are colleagues which are full professors and they're going to retire 3 or 4 years in advance to take care of their grandchildren. So the idea is that in Italy, there's a big loss of social services. We are needing childcare, so we are needing really services to families. And the idea is that this goes always on women, also on people who are at the highest level of their career. So I'm not sure, well, I fear I'm a big pessimist. I'm more pessimist than Elisa is. Just looking to the Italian situation, well, I see abroad that things are changing much quicker than in Italy, unfortunately. Well, we are losing positions, and it's not a great thing. Thank you.
Shoshana, do you want to close this round?
Yeah, I would just, I would like to second Elisa on her, remarks about women saying things, in meetings and then, as if they didn't say anything and then it's picked up by others. I live that as well. And the fact that things are also changing nowadays, I also agree that it was not so easy, to be a woman in science, many, many years ago. But I, for example, was very lucky to have family and husband who helped. And, your partner, plays a huge role. And I think what women do really well, some women, not all women, and not all men and some men. So, what women do better, I think it can do better, is to teamwork, the way they organize their labs, the way they make people work together, and they bring people together. So in my case, this was something I was trying to do always, and I felt that it was very rewarding, because the teamwork and the fact that women were also involved, and that people talk to each other rather than competing against each other, was something important that women can do. And with timeshare also, this is an important aspect of women's character. They can timeshare, they can solve problems with family and work, and this is the strength of women. I think this is something that should not be forgotten.
We have a parallel brain by construction. I think this is probably true. Well, so thanks very, very much. I think there's one point that I would like to pick up, and this is about this issue of being locked into traditional role or stereotypes. Is not something that only has to do with women. I mean, these are statistics that I am not 1000% sure, but if I look at the distribution of full professorships in Swiss universities across the whole board, so STEM, literature, care, medicine, whatever, it's very close to 50%. So you have as many males as you have female full professors across all disciplines. And then you look at STEM, and it's 75% male and 25% women. Now, that says that somewhere else, this ratio is inverted. And it's great, it's important, it's super important that we talk a lot about this. And of course, this is why we're gathered here today. But I think maybe the problem is broader, right? We should also be worried about the fact that not enough young men are encouraged to go along paths that are paths, for example, of becoming teachers in elementary schools. I think we all talked about the fact that it was a woman that taught in our elementary school, and so on and so forth, or care, these sort of things. Because if we really want to have an open and diverse society, both things go together. And in terms of role models, if you are a young girl and you see that your professor until high school is a woman, and then only when you get to the serious school you start having male professors, that's not it's already a message that has gone across. I think that it's dangerous. I just wanted to close. I know we had some other questions scheduled, but as always, the discussions are interesting and they tend to eat up time. But I wanted to close with maybe a straight question. So are actions, laws, affirmative actions important in this? What would you say is key? How do we react to the fact of being transparent in meetings? A quick round of the table, if you don't mind.
So maybe I can start. So we have this discussion, and it's very interesting, I think. And I think my vision is slightly different, perhaps. So in the UK, there are no specific laws on quota or anything like this. I think the community itself realized that there was a problem of diversity, not only gender, as you mentioned, but let's say the gender probably the easiest to address because we are 50-50 in Europe, at least, male and female. So there were no law imposed by the government, but the community itself realized that there was a need of change. And I agree, because I'm Italian, I come to Italy, I know colleagues in Italy, I agree. I think I'm lucky because in the UK, there was definitely a certain point, which I think started around 5 years ago, a real push to change, something were not acceptable anymore. So if you go to a meeting and there are no female speakers, that's not acceptable. People don't accept that. You really have to make a push. But there is no quota, there is no need. So while laws are definitely important and probably are more relevant depending in the countries where you are, I think being able as a community to recognize that there is a problem and it has to be addressed, you don't need someone from the top to tell you to address it, and you address it yourself. It's also very important because no laws will work if the community we don't decide that it's time to change. And I think this push happened here a little bit, and you can really see changes compared to years ago when I arrived, for example. That's my view.
Thank you. Carmen, did you want to?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's necessary some push. I think this system of quotas, it has pros and cons, and sometimes it's a bit exaggerated because all of us are always ask for committees and places, and you never know if you are there because you are a woman to fill the quota or because, but in general, I think it works and it makes people aware of this problem, and I think it's more positive than negative. And of course, I also have my bad experience on this. I will tell you. Once I was called to be part of a panel on what was it, on infectious diseases. I was invited to be a round table of infectious diseases, and I told them, but okay. Actually, I'm not an expert in infectious diseases. Once I studied some enzyme that was related to tuberculosis, but that doesn't make me an expert. Well, I didn't tell exactly this. So, well, I'm not able because I have things to do, whatever. But I can recommend you somebody that is expert and can substitute me in this roundtable. And then when I suggested somebody, a male, they told me, "Oh, sorry, that cannot be because we want a woman." So that was a bad experience for me, because imagine I say yes. So what they prefer to put an incompetent woman than a competent man, no? So but that's, I guess, a bit of exceptional, no? But so I mean, sometimes there's the cons and the pros.
We have to pay attention to, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that we want to lower the quality because of quota.
Yeah. I think the quota strategy is okay. The problem is when people apply it, maybe apply it well or not. It depends how you apply it.
Yeah, this has been bothering me quite a bit. This attitude when you go overboard. Of course, you need to push the women, but on the other hand, you need to do it in the right way. And sometimes, for many other aspects as well, to be politically correct is not always, really useful, in terms of advancing, the view of the society and advancing things.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm a big fan of conversations. I think that talking about things is much better than imposing things, a little bit like Paula was saying. I mean, it's something that has to come from the society. Elisa, maybe you can close on this and then we can transition on the next segment. I hate doing this. It's just a matter of time. I know that some of you have had constraints afterwards. So
that's a responsibility. I don't want to close. I just want to say that if you project the data, things will change, come to more or less some equilibrium balance, yes, in a number of years, which is unacceptable. Somebody estimated for Italy close to 175. I don't know, it's really too long. So some push is needed, I think. And actually, I think there are many ways to push. Somehow putting some constraint helps. Even ourselves, because to be honest, when I'm asked to suggest names in a program committee for a conference, for example, it's not rare that the first names that come to my mind are male. And if I am forced to put an effort on women, some good names come up. And typically it happens that when I hear a talk from one of them or some others, I'm surprised how good they are. So that I also have myself a prejudice sometimes. And so somehow an effort to explain why not, I think would be very useful. I've seen this happen when you put some constraint, some very good names come up. And most of the time, I think if you wouldn't, they wouldn't come up. Of course, we have to be careful that this can only happen with good suggestions, and we have ourselves to be very responsible in the use that we make of this. But there must be a strong push, I think, is important. And also in, for example, in how you evaluate CVs and how you compare CVs. This I think is something where you are forced, if you are forced to read a CV with that eye, I think that helps a lot, because sometimes people, just noticing that having 3 children makes a difference in the timeline of a CV is something that comes as, I really saw many colleagues not even noticing this until I pointed it out. But apart from that, also, yeah, I mean, some types of things that of loads and responsibilities that women take sometimes are not apparent. And if you are forced, you see them and you realize that that has really made a difference in the life of a department. So there is a possibility to use with care and attention also this aspect. Very often people who show off are not the ones that allow some very advanced work to be actually done. And so if we know that you have to pay attention, I mean, it also helps for me. Unless I'm forced, it's not the first thing that comes to my mind to look for that component. So some push, I think, is really needed.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I think we all agree, and I also think that it's important because the evaluation processes, the parameters that have been highlighted and picked as the, you know, is your H index bigger than mine or not? I mean, this is kind of, you know, a running question that sometimes I hear. And these are things that where I think we as a community can play a role to move things. And I believe, and this is something again that emerged in a bit as an undercurrent in what we were saying, it's very, very important to remember a couple of things. First up, you know, things are getting better, but they can get worse quickly, right? I mean, nothing is gained forever. So it's important to be vigilant and speak up, as someone was saying, when something goes wrong at all levels. I mean, not just people who are lucky enough to have had a career, but even if you are very young or if you are starting, at the same time, without crying wolf, because only of political correctness. I think finding the new balance between these two things is going to be crucial and the real challenge, possibly for the next generation, because I think, and us, of course, but I mean, you know, for them, because of the way in which they grew up, I think this is going to be a rather specific thing. I'm just going to transition into the next segment, because I think we're talking about science, we're talking about society. As you guys were talking, I was thinking that, you know, yeah, but you know, women were granted the right to vote in Switzerland in the 70s. Women in Italy didn't have the right to own a bank account without the approval of their husband until the 70s. So I mean, you know, there is a lot in society that moves slowly, yeah, 50 years since some of these changes have taken place. How can we testify? How can we use stories and also to think, and our own experiences also to think a little bit more broadly? So one tool that we have started using at CICAM in the past few years is the notion of using comics, because we feel that it's a fun thing to try. It's a challenge for us to try to speak in a language that is probably not one that we've learned as we were studying equations, but it's also a great way to go in schools, to go to meetings in you know, towns and things like that, and so to find ways to communicate with people that are unusual and perhaps engaging in different ways. So last year we presented a CICAM sponsored, if you want, comics called Cherchez des Femmes, that had the specific goal of trying to make the statement, it's really not strange for a young girl to be attracted to algorithms and codes. This year we decided to go a little bit broader. This is one of the reasons why Chiara is here with us, because we picked a comic that was not proposed by CICAM in the beginning, but that tells a story that I think is particularly relevant nowadays, because it's the story of a brilliant mathematician whose name was Mariam Mirzakhani, who contributed in important ways to the development of mathematics, who was the first woman to win a Fields Medal, and who happened to be Iranian. And I think it's just important for us to remember that, you know, the world is big. There are many different things going on. And sometimes the biggest problem is not your scientific career path, but is, can I show my hair in public or dance without risking prison? So I just want to take a few minutes to go through this issue with you, and I would like to start by asking Chiara, how did you pick this particular story? Why was this your choice?
Well, the idea is that usually UMI organizes an event for May 12th, which is Miriam Mirzakhani's birthday, and she was the first woman to get a Fields Medal. So the idea is that for 2022, we had to decide to do something, and Roberto Natalini proposed us to realize, to produce a comic story. And the idea was absolutely, well, we have to focus it on Mariam Mirzakhani, because she was the first woman to get a Fields Medal. I think that there are 60 winners of Fields Medal. Well, we had to add the last 4, so 64. And we had the first women in Seoul in 2014, and now in online International Mathematical Union Congress, the ICM, we had Marina Wiazowska this last July. So there are 2 over 64, but before this July, we had 1 over 60. And well, you see, Sarah is turning pages of our comic story. We decided to address to Mariam Mirzakhani because we didn't want an heroine. We didn't want, well, of course, she's a wonderful mathematician. She realized wonderful results. Well, one of her results is called the magic wand theorem. So you realize that it's really great because it's, well, something magic, something incredible. But anyway, she was a person who had a child. She was a person who had a personal life, who had a husband, who traveled, who had different interests. So it's not something very strange, a person who is closed in her ivory tower and doesn't speak to anybody. And we want to underline this. You see, here there's a billiard. And the billiard is the key of the comic story. And I'm really happy that Davide La Rosa, who is the writer of the play, of the screenplay, and the drawer, who is Silvia Zicche, took this point because, well, billiards are a great part of Mariam Mirzakhani's work. She worked in complex in dynamics, so the curves, which are the lines followed by the billiard ball. But anyway, you see that this is a closed region, and in a certain sense, this is a metaphor of her life. Till she is closed in this region, is in this finite region, in this limited region. Well, she cannot do everything she wants. But at a certain point, you can turn it, please. Well, the billiard flips and the ball goes further and further. And this is a technique, a mathematical technique, which is used to follow the trajectory of a ball in a billiard. You don't use the closed region, but you flip on the right and then on upper and then again on the right, and you follow the line, which becomes a straight line and no more a closed line in a closed region, in a finite region. And in a certain sense, this flipping of the billiard, which makes her horizon so large, which allows her to go in different countries, to move her to get her PhD in the US and to obtain her really great mathematical results, is a metaphor of the possibility of being free.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, in general, I was wondering, because it's always tricky, you know, to match the scale and of lives and adventures of people. So what were the main difficulties that you had to face, and what about, you know, hidden traces in these comics?
Well, the idea is that one of the biggest difficulties was to find a bridge, a connection between the mathematical results, her very sophisticated mathematical results of Mirzakhani, and the informations that large public could understand. We addressed to, well, say, senior high school students between 16 and 18 or 19 in Italy. So the idea is that images should be the key of the understanding for large people, for large public. And the idea is that there's a sort of inspiration which was given by several photos of Mirzakhani, just drawing on very large sheets of paper, just sitting on her knees and drawing, some of them with her young daughter in front. So we had to bridge, and I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful to Davide La Rosa and to Silvia Zicche, because they worked and trying to understand. We had several meetings by Zoom. We gave them lots of photos, images, stories about mathematicians, and they were able to link everything and to build a story which is really smooth but contains a lot of mathematical elements.
Thank you. I mean, I also love this title here, The Right to Err, or to get things wrong if you want. I think it's key for everybody talking about taking risks and selfies. But how do you use this? Do you find this is a good tool? What kind of reactions do you get when you try to talk about science with this?
Well, I try to serve as a mathematician and as a woman for my learned society, for Unione Matematica Italiana, and I often go in schools, in high schools, and we also have a couple of weeks of residential weeks during summer, which is called STEM in Ancona, which is a pun for STEM, because STEM in the local dialect means let's remain. So STEM in Ancona means let's remain in Ancona, and science, technology, economics, and mathematics in Ancona. And we present also this comic story, and well, the reaction is really amazing, because, well, they love this story, but they're also, in a certain sense, attracted by the life of Mirzakhani, by the possibility that a young girl who comes from Iran goes to the mathematics Olympiads and gets the highest score for a woman in Iran. She got a 41 for her first year and the 42, which is full score on her second year. And well, there are very good schools for girls in maths in Iran. But the idea is that when you are able to move to different countries, when you are able to do what you think it's good for you, what you think it's interesting, well, this becomes the possibility to interact with a whole world of wonderful mathematics, so in which the beauty is really the thing that attracts you.
Thank you, Chiara. And I mean, you know, the ball goes out of the door and Miriam walks following it.
And yes, in a certain sense, we used this also to signify that she left. You know, unfortunately, she left in 2017. She died at the age of 40 for a breast cancer. And well, the meaning of this infinite trajectory, which goes forth and forth, is that, well, she left, but in a certain sense, the possibility to explore is infinite. So there will be women, girls, who will come after her and will be able to continue her trajectory. And in particular, Marina Bayazowska was able to continue this trajectory because she was the second woman to get Fields Medal this July.
in a moment of EPFL pride, I should say that she's, I use the word colleague,
Yeah,
but she's at EPFL Lausanne, where the CCAM headquarters are located. Just to complete the description of this, this is a typical issue for Comics and Science. That is an editing, a little editing house in Italy that specializes on this type of tools for disseminating science. It's not just the comics, but then there are papers that try to explain and go through some of the themes that Chiara has illustrated for us. And we've done this twice now, and I must say that I am absolutely enthusiastic about using comics as a tool for chatting with, in particular, younger people. Lots of surprises can come up from a conversation that is guided from a comic. So this issue is available on our website. I think you have the information on the chat. It's also available through the website of Comics and Science and the Unione Matematiche Italiane, or the ones that we have published with Comics and Science. Just get in touch with us, and I'm sure we will find ways to collaborate together. This is not advertising, it's really putting on the table something that we feel could be useful for the community, and it's there for everybody to use and enjoy.
well, if I could just one point, add one point. Well, I would advertise for the letter, which is at the end of the book. If you can show it, Sarah, it's a letter, 2-page letter from a young girl who is in the 4th year of the Liceo Artistico of art school, and well, she's I know her, and I showed her the comics because she wanted to see the techniques of drawing. Well, Silvia Zica is very well known as a drawer in Italy. She works for Disney, and she was really struck by this story, and she wrote a letter to Mariam. And so it's a person who will probably not take a career in mathematics or in general in science, because she's an artist. She draws, she realizes she works in design. But anyway, she was struck by this story and by the comics on the story. Thank you.
But thank you, Chiara, for this. This is really, really nice. I don't know that I was sharing. I probably wasn't sharing. I'm sorry. I will show that to you as we go through the questions. But I think this brings me to another observation, which is, it's normal for us to think that, you are a physicist or a chemist or a mathematician, and you know about music. You read books. You know about poetry or architecture or a little bit of history. But it should be equally normal for people in the humanities or in the arts to think that science is part of culture. And so, why not spend a little bit of time by using the language that you prefer? But it's worthwhile the investment. And this is that Chiara was talking about a moment ago. So thank you very much to all our panelists. Now is finally time to open a communication channel with the audience. As I mentioned before, I think what we can do is, ask you to just signal in the Q&A tool that you want to ask a question, or maybe you have something that you'd like to share with us, and you will be invited to unmute and have the opportunity to talk directly with us, with our panelists. I don't know if while we wait for people to warm up, hopefully this will not take too long, if there are items that you would like to bring up again. And please, participants, do not be shy. This is really why we're doing this, is to talk to you. So
no questions.
that's very, very scary. I don't know why.
I was muted, sorry. I've been talking for 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So just to break the ice a bit. So I guess the majority of people that listen to us are girls or female scientists or people doing PhD. So one thing I tell my female students all the time is that sometimes either because you are insecure or because you are afraid of the challenge that at the end this type of work really at the end pose to you. It's perhaps sometimes there is a temptation to sit on the easy job. So to kind of get content easily, perhaps with the, in a position that seems safe, but is not maybe what you wanted. And I think as everybody in this panel, and I would say probably all the female colleagues, I myself at a certain point thought, is it really worth it? You get a child, or for example, you have other type of caring commitment, in the family, a request to, marry and things like that. And my suggestion is always to push yourself, because you might end up having regrets. You don't want to have regrets. You have to push yourself, and male do the same. You just don't say, perhaps they don't show. You have to push yourself and not get content easily. You really want to try. I always say, if you try to reach 10, you get 8. If you aim to 7, you get 5 for sure. So that's a suggestion I give to the students, to my students. It's not easy, and sometimes you get set back. But that's what the job requires as well. So you have to self-propel yourself all the time and convince yourself that you're worth it, that you have to do it, you have to try, and then you will succeed. And you will at the end. I really strongly believe that if you work hard, you will get back what you put in. So
if I may add 2 things, and then yes, we have 3 questions, so we're going to go to the audience. But I mean, first of all, with the possible exception of Mozart, I don't think that anybody is able to do anything, just because they have innate talent. I mean, you have to try, you will fail, you have to try again. Maybe you will not fail better, but eventually you will, gain something. Because if I may add something to what you were saying, Paola, and I agree with what you were saying, is that the journey is super important. Mm-hmm. You set yourself a goal, you set yourself, a target, something that you want to understand, etc., etc. And maybe, after a year, you will find out that you have not really understood the thing that you wanted to understand in the first place. But in the meantime, you will have learned a lot, and you will have understood, if you're lucky, half of a different thing. And if you're very lucky, 3 of different things. And this is something super important. So never underestimate the importance of the journey, I think. Yeah. Federica Troni has a question for us. Go, Federica.
First of all, hello to everybody. It's been a pleasure to listen to you, really. I'm Sarah's PhD student, so we've been experiencing firsthand female presence in science, because I was the only PhD student, female PhD student here at CICAM. Now it's 2 of us, so it's much better. But what I wanted to ask is, do you think that creating a female network in science could be useful to help each other, to give advices, and to cross all the bridges and the problems that can come out due to our being women?
Oh, may I say something?
First,
no, I think, I'm not sure. I think everybody should find their own network of connections, and it could be men, it could be women. Try to have your role models, 4 or 5 people that you admire. Maybe they are women, they are men, they're Sarah, and talk to them, not necessarily make a network of all the PhD students in the world, of the women PhD students. I'm not sure that's gonna help. I will go more locally to find your own network. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Maybe somebody has a better idea.
Yeah, sounds really very sensible.
So I don't know what happened to Lydia, but Sophie, you are on.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your stories and your advice. It's just incredible to hear all the things that you've tried and things that you're still trying. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask specifically, a few of you, I think, mentioned this kind of concept of sometimes women having to really think twice about maybe their appearance or how they're presenting themselves Am I being pushy enough or not too pushy? Am I being proud of my work or am I being arrogant? These kinds of questions. And maybe men face that too, I'm sure they do. But I was just curious if you could advise somebody who's kind of at the beginning of their career where appearances, aren't nothing. But this takes up a lot of mental and emotional energy to think, how am I being perceived? Is that still something that we should be doing? How would you advise a younger woman to balance that second guessing of yourselves, which we all do, with the need to be confident and push forward? I guess just if you could speak to that struggle of always thinking through, how am I presenting myself? Should I just ignore that and try and forget it? Or how do I help myself move forward despite some of these maybe doubts or second guesses I have? So I don't know if that was clear, but that's sort of what I was thinking.
Yeah, if I may say, because I think I brought this up more or less. It's difficult. It's difficult. I think, now looking back, I would say be yourself, right? Just be yourself and don't think about this too much. Actually, and also monitor the reaction that you get. So I think it's really finding your place in this, in this ecosystem you are. And I think having more self-confidence will make you feel better about it. I mean, what I was telling you was what kind of a lack of self-confidence that brought me to think about this, that brought me to think that, paying attention to my appearance or to appearance is key. And, in my career at Columbia, I saw a number of students that went overboard. They went for PhD exams, in tights and shorts. And they were brilliant women. And again, they did the opposite of what I was doing. They were trying to say, fuck you. In other words, we don't care about what you're saying. I'm going to play it and just make it and be myself. So, it's really up to you, your temperament, and look at the effects, what you really want to be. And probably this woman didn't want to be this woman, the way she was in these exams. So yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance, but as you go forward in your career, you'll see that it plays less of a it's less important.
Thank you.
Carmen, Elisa, you wanted to add something? Go.
Just to say that some network of women in that sense helps, some local network, maybe not just only for the science part, but just to share things and confess problems and so on. So I think some talking with some others and some other women easily very nearby can be of help. And the other thing is when you start, you don't know that some easy things that would be helpful for you, which are like which are putting solid things in your CV, for example, and rather than being worried. So doing some simple things and learning how to build your CV, not just how to present it or to show, but how to do things that then make you feel safe because you can write them down and it's facts. So somehow, if you get some network and some people around that can advise you how to build a CV, because sometimes you don't know when you're young that it's a good idea to collect a number of evidence of what you're doing, just because you don't care and you don't know how important it is. So getting somebody a bit more senior around that helps in that could be a good suggestion as well, just to put together the two questions that we got, I think.
Yes, and I mean, anybody else has anything else to say, please jump in.
If I could add,
yes.
Sarah, European Women in Mathematics has a mentoring program. You enroll as a mentor or you enroll as a mentee, and they try to match people together. And in this way, they are, well, you can build in a certain sense some network of people who support you. Also, as Elisa was saying, people, senior people who teach you some very short and simple points which could be enable you to get a better career, to present your results in a better way. The things are what they are, but it's important to present them in the better light you can. So the idea is, well, this mentoring program works quite well, and I would suggest to other learned societies to, well, in a certain sense, to take in a certain sense ideas from this. Well, they could arrange different points as small to change something, but I think that the core of the idea is good. It worked well for us.
May I say something about this? Because this is actually not really a problem of women, a problem of young scientists in general. And, what I was living in, from my experience in Canada, when I worked in Canada at this Hospital for Sick Children, University of Toronto, we had a mentoring activity of more senior scientists in the department who would help younger scientists to do exactly what you were describing. And, even also to review their grants, to review their CVs. And this was extremely useful. It's not really only a women's problem. It's a problem in general of younger people who, are looking for how to get ahead. So a mentoring program, as a woman, you can suggest this, in your department, in, your environment, to have such a mentoring program. And I think people will do this, really will be happy to help. And this is also very satisfying because you get in touch with the younger people, you see their problems. So I think this is a general approach that could be helpful.
I like that very, very much. I'm tempted now to say that maybe at CICAM we should always ask senior participants of workshops to have a mentoring session for the younger ones.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Carmen, you wanted to say something?
No, just that this is a good idea. I think we have a question by Celine Pratt, or did she already?
No, she's coming. She's coming up. I just didn't want to break. I also, because I wanted to say something about what Sophie was saying a moment ago. I think it's super important and I know this is not easy, because I remember very well what it was like when I was a young girl. And in general, for human beings, I think we all think that we are absolutely unique and that the things that happen to us have never happened to anybody else in the history of the world and never will happen again, which is true. It's true. We're all unique. But at the same time, I think it's super important to be aware, and this is something that for me only came through age, experience, and the privilege of working at CICAM, where I see many, many different types of people. There is no right way or wrong way of doing things. We all have to find how to navigate our own personality, the circumstances that can be very different. People who had to go through COVID during their PhDs have lived experiences as doctoral students that are completely different from anything that anybody else had ever lived before. So, and I find that reassuring, because I think that this is something that helps, for me, relieve the pressure. In the sense, it's normal to be afraid. It's normal not to know exactly what to do. And we all do things, not only in spite of that, but sometimes because of that. And the satisfaction of getting something done when you go through that sort of process, for me at least, is even greater than when everything just runs smoothly and everything is totally fine and easy and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. I just think that this is perhaps something to keep in the back of our minds. Celine, now please unmute yourself and ask your question. Sorry for keeping you waiting.
Yeah, don't worry. Thank you so much for sharing all these experiences. That's very good to hear that some of you really shared very similar things as I did. So I'm at the end of my PhD. I will start a postdoc in September. I'm almost 30 years old. I started in chemistry now, but I transitioned more to experimental biology. So I work a lot of hours, right? So I can work 12 to 14 hours every day. And I'm also thinking of starting a family someday, probably like in 1 or 2 years, my biological clock is ticking and so on. And my question to you would be, where is your limit? Where do you set your personal limit? Because I'm thinking that, for example, if I have children, I mean, this is not possible anymore. They're working is important, right? It's at the beginning of the career, working hard is important, but then at some point you should set yourself a limit.
Paola, why don't you start?
Yes, I think I see myself very much into that. So first of all, the biological clock, yes, it clocks, but it doesn't clock that fast, so you definitely have time. So what I found is that having children and having a family helped me in being way much more productive. So it tires you a lot. But because you know you have a very limited amount of time you can work, you really are able at the end to produce as much as you used to do in 10 hours when you are on your own and you don't have any other responsibilities in much shorter time. So you might be unable to work, which I think is also unhealthy, to work 14 hours a day, as it seems as you're saying you're doing now. So you will have not the possibility of doing it anymore. But it doesn't mean automatically you will become less productive. Actually, you find yourself to be way much more focused and concentrated because you have other things to do, and therefore you organize your time much better. So absolutely don't think that if you make a family and you start a family, you are becoming less productive, putting aside the maternity leave, of course, because automatically you become way much more focused. That's my experience, at least.
Yeah.
Shoshana, this is also your experience?
Yeah, well, I had twin daughters, okay, twins. And this was the first time in Switzerland that, I had a Swiss fellowship, the first time that a woman got the fellowship, and the first time that the woman was pregnant, and then that they got two. So that was a big change. So yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done what I did without help from my family. And my husband was fantastically helpful. He actually worked from home. He's an architect. And the family was very helpful. So you have to set up an environment that allows you to do this. And here you have to be just as inventive as you are inventive for your career, for your scientific career. And this, the network, the scientific network, the network, around you, private network, you have to work on this too, because this is, this is life. So you need to, arrange your work in such a way, arrange your life in such a way that it makes it possible. And not, it's not your role to really, do something that you don't want to do. So think about these networks, in a general, very general way. And, so this is what I have to say.
But building on that, I must say that, and I do see a difference, well, for sure, between the generation of the people who taught me, the generation of my same age colleagues, and the younger generation. There is a shift.
Huge shift, yeah.
Huge shift. I mean, partners are much more involved in the daily care for children, in the upbringing. We see it at CCAM, oftentimes a mom comes and then it's the dad that tags along to take care of the child when of course when they're breastfeeding, that's a bit difficult, but when they're not, there is much more engagement also from the partners. And I think this is important, and this is something that is changing quickly. I would say even in Italy, a bit less quickly maybe than in other countries, but even the Italian male is enjoys, I think, being a father in a more modern sense. So I would be optimistic. And
don't forget, because when you're doing this, you are also a role model to your children. The fact that your children see that you are happy in your career, happy, that you're doing something interesting, and my two daughters, both of them have PhDs in psychology and in biophysics. So, I didn't tell them what to do, but they kind of saw that made me happy, and you have to be happy. So try to be happy on all accounts, scientifically and otherwise. This is something.
Yeah, no, I mean, vast program, but
Yeah,
worth
that's program, yes.
the effort. Yes, yes. If I may, I mean, I quoted my dad just because at the beginning, but I come from a family in which both my parents worked, and my mother somehow had a more exposed career, which enabled my father to be a groundbreaker in other ways. So, for example, at some point, my mother worked for the president of the Italian Republic. She was the first woman in that kind of position, and there was no rule set in place when there was, an engagement with the foreign heads of states or whatever for husbands. So the whole ceremony was worked around the fact that there was the civil servant and the wife. And so for the first 2 or 3 months of my mom's new job, my dad would get invitations as Dr. De Caro's wife, which was wonderful because then he had an opportunity to break new grounds in being this thing.
Yeah.
So I think
Like the husband of Angela Merkel.
exactly.
Yes.
By the way, was a computational chemist. Let's not
I
forget that.
know, but when you are in the G7 and you are
Yeah.
Just be inventive. Okay, yeah. If there are no more questions, we are, I think, reaching the end of the time that we had allocated for this conversation. I mean, thank you all from the audience who asked the questions, and what can I say? Thank you so much, Carmen, Paola, Chiara, Shoshana, and Elisa. This was a pleasure and something that I am sure we will build on in future years at CCAM, but more generally, I think, in our daily activities. So I don't know if you want to say hi in any special way, but
Thank you, Sarah, for putting that together and for this fantastic conversation with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.